Okay, hello everyone, good afternoon, thank you for coming. My name is Muhammad Khalil, I'm the director of the Muslim Studies program here at Michigan State. First I want to tell you a little bit about this series. This is the third of our last series, and this was organized by three individuals. Professor Amy Derogatis, who's here, Professor Glenn Chambers, who may be joining us later, and then myself. And I want to thank the co-sponsors for this event, African American and African Studies, Muslim Studies Program, Office for Inclusion and Intercultural Initiatives, Digital Humanities, Department of Religious Studies, we have actually Professor Arthur Verslewis from Religious Studies here, Center for Gender in Global Context, and College of Arts and Letters. And the title for this event is Black Islam and Hip Hop. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speaker. Professor Kayla Wheeler is an assistant professor of Area and Global Studies and Digital Studies at Grand Valley State University. She received her PhD in Religious Studies from the University of Iowa in May 2017. She has an MA in Religious Studies from the University of Iowa, an MA in Islam and the West from Queen Mary, University of London, and an MA in Bioethics from Case Western Reserve University. Her research interests include Islam in the Americas, Islam and gender, digital identity, religion and media, material religion, and Black performativity. Currently, she is conducting research tentatively for her book entitled Fashioning Black Islam, which will explore how Black Muslim fashion designers, stylists, and social media tastemakers use fashion to challenge hegemonic Islamic femininity, to create alternative modes of Islamic knowledge production and transmission by centering materiality and embodied practices, and to construct networks of belonging based on a shared Black Muslim woman identity that is facilitated by social media. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Professor Kayla Wheeler.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you all so much for inviting me, especially the Muslim Studies program and all of the sponsoring offices. So today I'm going to present part of my research from a long-term project on Black Muslim women's fashion, which has taken me a long indirect route to hip-hop. So I'm interested in looking at how Black Muslim women use material and visual culture to construct and perform their identity and to challenge Arab centrism in American Islam. Today I'm going to highlight two contemporary Black Muslim women rappers, Misunderstood and Aaliyah Sharif, who use their music to further the Black Muslim feminist tradition in the United States. So just a show of hands, how many of you have ever heard of Misunderstood or Aaliyah Sharif? Okay, so like 4 of you. How many of you all have heard of Mona Haider? She did the Wrap My Hijab and Men Are Dogs. Okay. How many of you all have heard of Dean Squad? Okay. So usually when I do this talk, like no one raises their hand for Aaliyah Sharif or Misunderstood, and like literally all of the Muslims and some of the white people who aren't Muslim will raise their hand for Mona Haider. So we'll get into why other places that happens, but not here. You all are awesome. Good job. So I first became interested studying specifically Black Muslim women rappers after noticing how popular Mona Haider became after she released her debut song, Hijabi. So I'm a hip hop head. I was raised by like a hip hop head who like used to date Tupac randomly. And when I heard this song, I was like so annoyed that this was the thing that the mainstream media decided to pay attention to. Because as much as I love Mona Haider as an activist, like her flows are rather weak. So I wanted to, I love her, but no. And so I wanted to know why she had become the face of Islam and hip hop. And Aaliyah Sharif, who's been rapping for like 10 plus years, was pretty much unknown until the Women's March in 2017. So I'm going to begin my presentation with a brief overview of the history of hip hop and its main elements, so we're all on the same page. Next, I will highlight the influence that Islam and Muslims have had on hip hop, specifically within the United States. As journalist Harry Allen argues Islam is the unofficial religion of hip-hop. Islam, specifically the Nation of Islam and the Nations of Gods and Herbs, who are also known as the Five Percenters, have played a major role in creating, maintaining, and expanding hip-hop across the past 4 decades. So the last thing I'll do is explore how Aliyah Sharif and Misunderstood use hip-hop to expand the Black Muslim feminist tradition. So my primary conversation partners for this presentation are Suad Abdul Kabir. You should buy her book on Muslim Cool, and Inaya McMurray, who have both explored the experiences of Black Muslim rappers, as well as Jamila Kareem, who highlights Black Muslim women's engagement with Black feminism. So hip-hop genealogies usually begin in the South Bronx in the mid-1970s. So poor urban Black and brown people were facing the effects of post-industrial decline and social upheaval, including white flight from cities taking away property taxes, the loss of manufacturing jobs, and the city government's failure to provide public services, like simple things from like filling potholes and making sure if buildings were burning that the fires were actually put out. So the conditions would only get worse during the Reagan-Bush years with renewed attention to the war on drugs, which harmed Black and brown communities the most. The hope of the civil rights movement had died out as Black radical leaders were assassinated by the US government and its agents or imprisoned. Hip-hop emerged as a space for Black and brown urban youth to have their voices heard and to call out these oppressive structures. And so I'm going to be talking about primarily like political resistance today, but I just want to point out that like rap and hip-hop culture in general is not all about doom and gloom. Oftentimes when we talk about Muslims, that's what we focus on, and even when we study hip-hop. But hip-hop has always been a space for joy and fun where you can just let out, get loose. A lot of the early hip-hop scene was around rent parties. And so some of the early pioneers were not just political activists, but they were fun guys like Sugar Hill Gang and Biz Markie and Houdini. So hip-hop pioneer Africa Bambaataa states that hip-hop is primarily broken into 4 elements. MCing, which is like the actual rapping, the lyrical part of it, DJing, graffiti, and breakdancing. For my own selfish reasons, I would argue that fashion is the 5th element. So today I'm just going to talk about MCing. So I align with Imani Perry's definition of hip-hop music. The MCing aspect is primarily a Black American art form that is rooted in Black American oral culture, including signifying, storytelling, call and response, and African American vernacular English. You can come in. This in no way ignores how intricately linked hip-hop is with the larger Black Atlantic, including the Caribbean, especially Jamaica and Puerto Rico, the African continent, and Western Europe. Many of the founding parents of hip-hop were from the Caribbean with familial ties in England, but these artists were primarily drawing from Black American Southern musical traditions. So early on when hip-hop was first getting started out, most people were sampling James Brown, and he today remains one of the most sampled artists. So they were drawing from the rock and funk elements of Black American music. So I understand that it is important to decenter the United States with our contemporary studies of cultural history, but sometimes when we do that, we actually do ignore the rich history of Black American cultural production. So hip-hop is a space of collaboration, competition, and improvisation, where the interconnectedness of the African diaspora and their struggles is affirmed. So mainstream hip-hop, unfortunately, is super male-dominated, which often only allows for a handful of women rappers to be successful at the same time. So for like 6 or 7 years, it was Nicki Minaj. Now it's Cardi B. And we might have a few sprinkles of other women, so Megan Thee Stallion. But it's really a small arena for women, whereas there are hundreds of male rappers who look and sound exactly the same. So despite this marginalization, Black women have been at the forefront of hip-hop since the very beginning and have played an active role in expanding the genre. So one of the most pivotal moments of early hip-hop took place at Cindy Campbell's back-to-school party in 1973. Her brother, DJ Kool Herc, debuted a new sound that he had been developing for months, isolating the instrumental portions of James Brown's music to focus on the drums and beats, which allowed lyricists to produce rhymes to the beats. So since the beginning, of hip hop, Islam has played an important role in the construction and development. The last poets, who are considered some of the grandfathers of hip hop, were formed on May 19th, 1968, on Malcolm X's birthday at Marcus Garvey Park in Harlem. They saw themselves as carrying on Malcolm X's mission, promoting Black self-determination and Black nationalism. They released an album of poems spoken over a beat produced by Congo drums, which DJ Kool Herc would mirror 5 years later. So their poems, which included an emphasis on Black power, laid the foundation for a lot of MCs afterwards. So they've been sampled by Common, NWA, and A Tribe Called Quest. In addition to being influenced by Muslims, the genre is full of Islamic symbols, images, and phrases, from Kanye West rapping Allahu Akbar and throwing hot cars, and Heard Him Say, to Rhapsody featuring Black hijabis dancing in a church in her music video for the song Betty Shabazz. The Nation of Islam and the Nation of Gods and Earths have had the biggest influence on hip-hop. So briefly, I'm going to break it down. These two organizations emphasizing their commitment to knowledge of self, which I argue is central to hip-hop music. So the Nation of Islam was founded by W.D. Farad Muhammad, who's this guy right here, in Detroit, so not that far away from here, in 1930. Farad Muhammad met many of his followers during his day job selling raincoats and silk as a door-to-door salesman. He told potential customers that the silks he sold were the same kind that their people used to wear in their native country, where he had traveled from to share the truth with his Black brothers and sisters. He invited interested listeners to hear his message at the local meeting hall. He began his speeches by stating, "My name is W.D. Farad, and I came from the holy city of Mecca. More about myself I will not tell you. I will not tell you yet, for the time has not yet come. I am your brother, and you have not seen me in my royal robes." According to Farad Muhammad, Black people in America, or Asiatic Blacks, as his members often identified themselves, were members of the lost tribe of Shabazz. So you all know Malcolm X's other name he used, Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, that's the Shabazz coming. The Shabazz tribe had lost its unique Asiatic language, religion, and cultural practices during enslavement. The Nation of Islam provided a remedy to this by teaching members about their ancestral past. They were the original people who ruled the world before they were enslaved by white people. Farad Muhammad implored his listeners to denounce Christianity, a religion of spooks and spirits that had been forced upon them by their captors. God was not a spirit in the sky. He was on earth in the form of a Black man. Instead of quietly suffering on earth in the hopes of earning a higher position in heaven, Farad Muhammad told his followers to create their own heaven on earth through building a strong, independent Black community. His message primarily attracted poor urban Black people who had immigrated from the Caribbean or migrated from the South, both in the hopes of escaping white supremacist terrorism and to find more economic opportunities. So the man on the left, Allah the Father, was a former student of Malcolm X and a member of the Nation of Islam. However, he left the nation over an important theological debate. Well, he believed that white people were the devil and Black man was God. He couldn't really come to terms with the fact that in the Nation of Islam, under Elijah Muhammad's rule, that W.D. Farad Muhammad, the founder, had been transformed into God in flesh. And so Allah the Father could not really rationalize the idea of this racially ambiguous man being considered God, if God was supposed to be a Black man. And so the wild thing about Farad Muhammad is, like, scholars, there's no general consensus about his racial identity or even where he came from. So he appears in Detroit mysteriously and leaves, rather, mysteriously in 1933. If you go by the FBI records, which are highly problematic, he is more than likely Turkish. He could also be Pakistani, and I've even heard Samoan. Whatever he is, he was imagined as Black. But for Allah the Father, God had to be a dark-skinned, monoracial black man, which W.D. Farad Muhammad was not. So Allah the Father left the organization and founded his own called the Nation of Gods and Earths in 1964, and it's more commonly known as the 5%ers. And so that name comes from a key theological belief of the organization, that 85% of people are unaware of the truth about themselves and God, that God is a black Asiatic man. 10% of the people know the truth, but refuse to share it with the masses in order to stay in power. And the remaining 5% are the poor righteous teachers who are committed to sharing the knowledge with the rest of the world. So central to this is the mastery of the supreme mathematics and the supreme alphabet, which members use to reveal the true meaning behind words and numbers. So here's an example of one. So for instance, if we were to use the supreme alphabet to break down the word Allah, A-L-L-A-H, which is just Arabic for God, we would realize that A is for arm, double L's, leg, throw in another arm, and a head. And what do you get with that? A man. Allah. So Allah is a man. If you're wondering where black women are in this equation, they are the earths. So gods and earths. So rap music has been one of the primary vehicles for the 5%ers to spread the truth. As Saad Abdul Kabir notes, the 5%ers' lasting influence is their emphasis on the mastery of language, mainly through the supreme alphabet, which has been central to setting the standards of rhetorical eloquence in hip-hop. It's not a coincidence that some of the most lauded lyricists in hip-hop are 5%ers, including Puba, Big Daddy Kane, Busta Rhymes, and GZA from Wu-Tang Clan. The 5%ers' influence on hip-hop can also be seen through the popularity of such phrases as dropping science or breaking it down, which both means revealing the truth, what up God, which is a greeting that recognizes